Throughout the years of me making YouTube videos, I've tried to avoid saying that something is my favorite, just because I know that my preferences will most likely change, and especially with tech videos now, something that might be my favorite at the moment might have a more advanced or better version in the future. However, there's one product category where the singular product I can call my absolute favorite has not changed, and that's because of what it stood for, what it was used for, my personal experiences with it, and how it really showed what the company was up to and what they stood for at the time. That product is the 12-inch Powerbook G4. Let's talk about it. Now, I'm sure some of you all are probably thinking it's really weird that my favorite laptop is something that was introduced all the way back in 2003, and you'd be right, but this is my favorite because of more than just the performance, because it definitely can't keep up with day-to-day tasks. It definitely is nowhere close to what we have in laptops today, and in general, it's just kind of old. But there are so many things about this laptop that you can see in modern Apple products, even just modern laptops, and there's a lot of things about this that I wish Apple would bring back today, and so those are going to be the things that we focus on. But first, let's talk about this model in particular and where Apple stood when this model came out. Now, this particular PowerBook is the 2005 model. It's the last one that Apple ever released, and by definition, it's the most refined version because, well, there were no refinements to be made after it was discontinued. Unlike the earlier sub-900 MHz PowerPC G4 that was introduced in 2003 with these models, this one is rocking a 1.5 GHz PowerPC G4, which was significantly more powerful, and it was running right up alongside the performance levels, at least on the CPU side, of things like the earlier PowerPC G4 desktops. Granted, it did run a bit hotter, but that's kind of why Apple ended up switching to Intel later on anyway. Something else contributing to the heat in this laptop, but also contributing to the impressive performance, was the NVIDIA GeForce FX Go 5200 with 64 megabytes of video memory. This meant that you could actually have very impressive performance at honestly not a whole lot of heat. I played Halo on this for a little bit, and it did kick the fan on, but overall I would call it a reasonable amount of heat. And actually, come to think of it, it was running even cooler still than the Radeon cards you'd find in the bigger versions of the PowerBook G4. So overall, pretty reasonable in terms of heat, and overall very impressive for the performance. In terms of RAM, this computer is actually kind of interesting because as far as I can tell, this is one of the first models where Apple actually soldered down RAM. Now, you can add more RAM, but by default, you have 256 gigabytes of RAM soldered to the board, with an expansion card allowing up to another gigabyte to be added. So in this case, we have 1.25 gigabytes of RAM, but you also got to keep in mind that your standard amount, when it was originally shipped, was 512 megabytes. So 1.25 was ballin'. This particular model also has the largest hard drive available at 80 gigabytes, running at 5,400 RPM. Now, that's not a whole lot by today's standards, but that was a ton back in the day, and the base model actually came with 60 gigabytes. So yeah, you're already running at max spec on this machine. Pretty cool. I mean, in general, whoever owned this before me got the best model available. 80 gigs of storage, 1.25 gigabytes of RAM, and it even has the 8X combo drive, meaning you can work with DVDs, CDs, read, write, whole nine yards, and it's slot loaded, which I guess every PowerBook at that time was slot loaded, but it was really cool. And this was the only one where the slot load was off to the side instead of being directly in front, so if you have it in your lap, it's not going to shoot the CD out into your waist. It's the little things that I enjoy, and obviously Apple agreed with that idea because all the other ones after that came out the side. Anyway, moving from what's inside, let's take a look at what's outside, and the first thing is, of course, that 12-inch or 12.1-inch TFT LCD display. This display is a 4:3 aspect ratio at 1024 by 768, which by today's standards isn't a lot, but by yesteryear, that is a ton of screen space, because you got to keep in mind, I have a display, a 17-inch display from this same era, that is also 1024 by 768. So seeing that packed into a 12.1-inch screen is awesome. Moving to the side of the laptop that has ports, we're looking now at not MagSafe, but an original style barrel plug, as well as a modem, and 10100 Ethernet. No gigabit yet, but that was still fast for its day. We also have FireWire 400 because you could do video work on this, and that was one of the fastest ways to transfer video at the time, and it was also the best way to plug in and charge your iPod, while also transferring up to 1,000 songs into your pocket. I love that phrase. Next up, we have USB, which at this point was finally catching up to FireWire. This is USB 2.0, so it was running at FireWire 400 speeds, actually a little faster, so you could just pick your poison for the port connections. Then you have a weird one that not a lot of people are familiar with. This is Mini VGA. This is an external display connector that, yes, requires a dongle. Apple was doing that even back then. And this could support an external video output of 2048 by 1536. That was huge at the time. Obviously, I'm running way more than that on most of my devices now, but coming out of a 12-inch laptop in 2003, or 2005 in this case, pretty impressive. Then you have audio in for the music mixer on the go who needs an input source for their audio, and you have a headphone jack, which is something that even some modern laptops don't have anymore. Oh, and a Kensington lock, because a lot of these got used for education, and that was actually where my first experience with this came from, but it's nice to have, I guess. Looking at these ports on the side really shows what I was kind of getting at the start of the video, which is where Apple was at the time. They understood that they had their basic products, like the iBook, which was meant for the general consumer, and then they had the Powerbooks, which were for the professionals and the prosumers. And seeing this port selection really does show that Apple cared about the pros and wanted to give them options. A ton of options. Something else to keep in mind in terms of giving people options is the fact that the battery in this is removable, and, well, considering the battery life on this was at its best 5 hours, some people might be on the road longer than that without an option to charge, so having a removable battery was super nice. And almost as if Apple was anticipating this to be an extremely mobile product where people might not be able to readily charge it, they put a set of LEDs and a button on the battery. So if you did have multiple batteries to quickly swap out on this laptop, you could pull one out of your backpack or camera bag, press the button, and see the charge right there on the battery without having to plug it into the laptop, boot it up, see if there's a charge. You could just see it. It was like some of those old video camera batteries, and even some modern ones today, where you can just see the status before hooking it into the camera. I know why they got rid of this today, because you can't remove the batteries anyway, but even later in life, when the batteries were non-removable, but they were still, on the thicker model laptops, you had a button on the side. It's just something convenient about it. And on the topic of upgradability, I know I mentioned the RAM was upgradable, but your RAM door is right there on the bottom with 4 Phillips head screws instead of any weird pentalobe screws, so that's nice. Again, it just shows that in its day, back when this was released, Apple really did care about differentiating pro computers from the general consumer computers. The pro machines had a ton of upgradability, a ton of ports, a ton of power, and, well, this one, in my opinion, was the best. But now that we've gone over the specs and all the things that it came packed with back in 2005, now we're going to get into why I think, in my opinion, this is the best laptop Apple ever made and why it is my personal favorite. So first off, a little bit about me. I love efficient, compact, powerful things. You can see this in my choice of desktop with the Mac Studio. You can see this in my choice of tablet with the iPad Pro. You can see this in my choice of car. I have a Fiesta ST making almost 250 horsepower and almost 300 foot-pounds of torque. I love when small things have surprising amounts of power, and that's exactly what Apple introduced with this 12-inch Powerbook. It was running right up alongside desktops that were only a few years older than it, and it was running right alongside the same laptops with larger screens in the case that somebody needed it. Now, back when these computers were introduced, Apple would often show off the video and photo editing prowess in pretty great detail during their introduction videos, and the 12-inch Powerbook G4 was no different, being shown as a very portable but still capable video and photo editor. Now, this portion of the video is being edited on a Powerbook G4, and it's also being filmed on a period-appropriate 720p digital camera. I know from experience doing anything like video work on these today is a very slow and painful process, but for its time, I'm sure it was very impressive to see video being cranked out as efficiently, I suppose. Granted, if I were somebody in the creative field back in the day, I probably would have preferred photo editing just because it's a little more instant than video editing, but it's still impressive that it can pull it off nonetheless. And you could do it all in a computer that didn't compromise on keyboard size, still had a completely usable trackpad, was built like a tank, and was only a little bit thicker than the other two laptops, but also didn't bend nearly as much as the 15 and 17-inch MacBooks of its day. Or Powerbooks. I keep calling them MacBooks, Powerbooks. The only real compromises that you got with this computer were things like the slightly lower battery life, the lack of things like an S-Video port or PCMCIA or FireWire 800, but for a lot of people, if you were already in the market for a small laptop and you did your research and saw that this was the best option, you were probably also aware that those were the things that were missing. I remember the first time I got to mess around with one of these laptops. It was back in 2007, 2008. It was on a field trip with my school back when I was in middle school, and we had just started getting netbooks for our electronic learning classes, and those things were garbage. They were some Acer crap, and they didn't run very well. They weren't super powerful, but they were only a little bit smaller than this Powerbook G4. And one of my friends had what I thought at the time was an incredibly impressive HP computer, big old 15-inch display, the whole 9 yards. And this Powerbook G4 ran circles around both of them. I remember one of the things that I really, really loved to do on any computer was just play Halo. As crappy as the port was, I loved playing it on computer. There was just something about being able to play with the settings. And my friend's computer couldn't even run it. It would start up and just crash immediately. And obviously these netbooks couldn't do it. But this PowerPC G4 just played it like it was nothing. And I was so impressed at the time, and I kind of just fell in love with this machine when that happened. And yes, I know it's kind of hilarious that one of the things that made me fall in love with an Apple product was the fact that it could play Halo, which was a Microsoft product. Halo is one of my favorite games of all time, don't judge me. The reason why this laptop is my absolute favorite laptop of all time, especially my favorite Apple laptop of all time, is because ever since I got to play around with a 12-inch computer that performed as well as its 15 and 17-inch big brothers, I have always wanted Apple to make something like that, and they never have since. Again, I am a huge fan of taking something super compact and getting the most power out of it, whether it be a car, a laptop, a desktop, whatever. And we really haven't gotten something even remotely close to what we saw back in 2005, because we got the 12-inch, I guess, MacBook. It's not even close, because it was an iPad, but running Mac OS. And on the topic of the iPad, that's the closest we've gotten is the iPad Pros, but those aren't really even in the same class as Apple's laptops because they don't use the same software. So while you think, oh, well, the M1 chip is in the iPad and it's also in the 15-inch model MacBook Pros or 16-inch model MacBook Pros, it's not the same. Because while you could say the chips are similar and the form factor is similar if you buy the keyboard, it's not running the same software. Look, as much as it pains me to admit, I am fully aware that this laptop is a relic of its time. There are things about it that Apple is never going to bring back to their laptops. Things like the wide variety of ports, the disk drive, battery swapping, or even things like the RAM expansion. Those are all gone. But the idea of taking the power of your larger machines, in today's instance, the 16-inch and 14-inch machines, and packing it down into a 12-inch design that doesn't become an iPad, I think that's a concept that Apple definitely shouldn't give up on. Because while there are some benefits to having an iPad with this kind of performance, or going up to the 14-inch machines if you want a compact but powerful system, there's just something appealing about being able to throw this tiny little thing in your backpack and know that you're still getting the performance you would out of the larger machines without having to carry around the weight of the larger machines. Either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I wanted to do something fun, just something for me, considering the last few videos I've done have all been talking about other videos and my issues with them. You can go check those out over there if you really want to, but this video was just for me, and hopefully you all enjoyed it as well. If you did, maybe leave a like, definitely subscribe. Leave some comments down below. What's your favorite laptop of all time, or just favorite computer of all time? I'm going to try to hang out in the comments after this video is posted for a little bit and interact with you all. But aside from that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there, and have a good one.